session is about the Indian diaspora, and within it, it is about Indians with skills, about brains. The two speakers complement each other, one representing financial capital and appropriately named after the goddess Laxmi, the other myself representing what we economists call human capital, favored by the goddess Saraswati, and certainly not by Lakshmi, I can assure you, unless I get to be your friend, Mr. Mittal. Today, the Indian diaspora of the skilled is rightly regarded as a great asset, but this was not always so. For in recent years, both the reality and the perception of out-migration of our skilled citizens have changed from concern to celebration, from trauma to triumphalism. In the 1960s, even the 1970s, the out-migration of the skilled citizens was regarded as a brain drain, as a loss to our economy. Indeed, many wrote about it in alarmist terms. Draconian restrictive measures to stem the outflow were suggested by otherwise quite sensible writers on public policy. One of my great friends, a distinguished economist, who was himself over 40, said anybody under 40 should not be allowed to leave to study, because if they went at a tender young age, they would want to stay on and not return to their country. Well, things of that sort were quite commonplace in those days. There was huge amounts of anxiety. Some of us took even then a less anxious view of the matter. I, for example, urged at the time that it was necessary to distinguish between the brain drain phenomenon and the brain drain problem. That the phenomenon did not imply necessarily that there was a problem for us. But I must confess that the arguments that we used were mostly defensive, arguing that the harmful effects were exaggerated, and rarely our arguments took the form that the phenomenon of out-migration of the skilled was beneficial, even hugely beneficial, which is really the view we have come to today. For instance, I recall arguing that the brain was not a static given thing. Sitting in one uncongenial place, maybe Delhi at that time when we were writing, it could drain away faster than if it went abroad and was stimulated by a better work environment. Certainly holding back people against their desires was calculated to ensure that the productivity of the skilled would decline. People would not be enthusiastic about where they were in uncongenial climates. Or we argued that even if we wanted to, we could not effectively hold people back against their wishes. Such restrictions would only intensify the desire to leave, and it would be hard to close the border to immigration, which after all was even then well recognized as a human right. Indeed, restrictive actions would fly in the face of the fact that the skilled would find ways around the restrictions so that they could improve their professional and life prospects by migrating to other countries, usually richer countries with better facilities. And in fact, I often say that while Shirley MacLaine and us Hindus, those of us who are, believe in an infinity of lifetimes, Shirley MacLaine and the rest of us try to maximize our welfare in the current one like everybody else. Right? We are very myopic. And so ingeniously, people will find ways to get past all these restrictions. And I won't bore you with that. It's a whole big topic, but borders are porous, and people find ways to get around them. So a few positive gains from skill out migration at that time were in fact mentioned, but their importance was not really understood. For instance, we did talk about remittances, but at that time it was a trickle. And secondly, remittances, we know well, come from the unskilled, people of our class, who are mostly the skilled people. We don't have people, siblings and parents who need to be supported. It just doesn't work that way. There are remittances coming from the skilled, but they're mostly of a very different altruistic sort for NGO activity, for doing more IITs and IIMs and so on, but they're not in the nature of having to support your family, which is really where the bulk of the remittances today are coming from. So I don't think, at that time, I think we were correct not to emphasize remittances too much, but it was recognized. Then there are all kinds of externalities we could think of, spillover effects into, of one kind or another. And then the institutional changes were also discussed, like, if people did go abroad, because you can stop them from going abroad, how could you still change your institutions in a way where they could really still come and help you? So I used to argue that since promiscuity is easier than marriage, if people insist on leaving and not coming back, you could still get them to come to and fro, do all sorts of things to attract them and get their services and their loyalty. This is the part of the diaspora kind of approach to some extent. And then there were also proposals which I'm associated with, that if in fact people were going to retain their citizenship, you might want to actually, if you give them voting rights, like we are discussing today, or at least citizenship rights with voting rights, and then you could also then extend income taxation to them, because you shouldn't have just rights and no obligations. The citizenship carries both, and certainly that's the American model. So this is something which doesn't make me very popular with NRIs, who want the rights but not the obligations. But anyway, I don't go for a vote, so, I mean, except my own. Okay, so today, the brain drain template has been totally discarded. I mean, this mold, we think of it as a drain, as a problem, has been totally discarded. We no longer think of skilled migration as a threat, it is an opportunity, certainly for countries like India. So let me first mention some facts and then add some commentary, and then I'll close. If I get close to 25 minutes, you can just throw something at me. Okay, the skilled diaspora is now enormous and growing. So the fact is, it's a dramatically different scale which we are dealing with. Between 1990 and 2000, Indian-born residents in the United States alone doubled to just over 1 million. They were rich in human capital. Of those aged between 25 and 64, 40% had a bachelor's degree, astonishingly. And of these, 40% in turn had a graduate degree. The total income exceeded $40 billion in 2000. This is roughly 10% of Indian GDP, gross domestic product or national income, in that year. So we are dealing with a scale which is really dramatic and different. Now, let me turn to the commentary in terms of the benefits, because nobody thinks of it as a downside. Actually, when the people used to say, oh, Bhagavati has gone away, Sen has gone away, what a terrible thing. Well, I mean, today you would say, fantastic, there's more room at the top. There are lots of people waiting. And it's a country with very good educational facilities, and there are continuously new people coming up, like young goes right here and so on. So I think what we need, so I won't talk about the downside, because we don't think in terms of downside anymore, and quite correctly. But on the benefit side, first, I think, which is mentioned in the little handout, on the political side, there are huge payoffs today. Like in the United States, I mean, I often say we're the next Jews of America, because America is like, I mean, it's ready to be taken by any community which has merit. You could be a green man from Mars, you could be anything, brown, black, blue, as long as you're from outside the United States, you're absorbed, you're regarded highly. Merit works, and we have the merit. And for a variety of reasons, it's not our DNA or genes, but it's just the fact, in my judgment, it's our democracy, secularism, and educational emphasis, which makes us so successful compared to countries with fundamentalism and lack of democratic rights and so on, a military dictatorship like Pakistan. I mean, I just make a comparison between us Indians in America, and every day there is somebody who's coming up with something dramatic. I mean, maybe there are two in a day on the front page of the New York Times and so on. But you think in terms of Pakistan, which is the same people, exactly the same people as us, and you can count the number of distinguished Pakistanis in the United States not even on the fingers of one hand, but on one finger. And you still have some empty space there, and why? It is, I think, fundamentalism and military dictatorship, because you cannot think, you cannot breathe in that climate unless you're adventurous and so on and hold forth and able to challenge. You cannot really create, in my judgment. And I think these are our strengths, not the fact that we are brilliant. We are, of course. but it is the environment, it's the policies, and that is what we have to be proud of. Well, anyway, so we really are taking America. So it's a Trojan horse principle. You can get inside and really work. If you write from here, even in a magazine as famous as India today is likely to be unread. But right there, we've got Farid Zakaria and Pico Iyer, and even chaps like me write some, quite a bit. And people get to hear you. You go and talk to you testify before Congress and so on. So that is what I call the Trojan horse principle, which works in the United States beautifully. And that works to cement the bonds and have payoffs, which, there are many obvious payoffs, including like getting Hillary Clinton here tomorrow. It's not just that she likes Chaat and Chatwal, but I think she's something deeper. So, so as we profit from globalization, we also need to keep the global markets open. And I think this has been a big breakthrough in our country, as the previous session was also emphasizing. And to keep global markets open, we have to understand that the same pressures which make us go outwards and which see this as an opportunity, sometimes is perceived, even in the United States, as a threat. I mean, the United States is really a very strange country, and actually, Arun, you should take it up with Hillary Clinton, because one of the problems with the Democratic Party, unlike Tony Blair's Labour Party, is steadily being devoured by the unions and so on, who are very fearful of trade. So I'm writing a new book called Terrified by Trade. The paradox of protectionism in the United States is like a big Rottweiler, which is really what it is, a gigantic, fierce dog. And it's so afraid of, little poodles like Mexico, Far East, and now India. It's the yellow peril has been succeeded by the brown peril. And poor Kerry was all mixed up in it, poor chap. I mean, he doesn't have a mean protectionist bone in his body. But there he was talking about, things he shouldn't have been saying. But that is, you should really force Hillary in a undiplomatic moment into saying, what are you really, how are you going to handle this? But actually, a lot of Indians did pitch in on the outsourcing debate. Not too many, but I certainly did, and a few others. And actually, in the end, we did manage to contain it in a significant way. And I had to fight my own teacher, Professor Paul Samuelson, who had unguardedly given handle to this. And ultimately, he apologized to me, but at the same time, he said, at least I made you more famous than you were. So how could I complain? Now, the remittances, I think, there is an altruistic element, which I think Mrs. Gothard and others will recognize, that the new wealth which you're getting through IT sector and so on, all this and the Wall Street and so on, first, it's quite enormous, and secondly, it accrues to skilled people. So these are like the giants of Ahmedabad, Simon Sharma's Dutch burglars, Calvinists, the old families, which made money, but which had a social responsibility, in the 19th century, 18th century, and so on. Then, you see, for a while, we got wealth, like in my own state of Gujarat, where the old families died out with the textile mills because of our terrible textile policy. So all the mills disappeared, and along with them, the old families declined with their old values of social work and so on, accumulation and social work, not ostentation. Then we got new contractors getting the money, and so they would build potholes and call them roads and make a lot of money. But they had no education. Now the new wealth we are getting is actually in the IT sector, et cetera, in the financial sector, and those are educated people. And actually, they also make so much money, present company included, that it is, combined with their, even if they bought a castle a day in Europe, they couldn't spend it, right? So they have to, so I'm for extreme inequality. Like if all of us got $1 million each, we would probably rush out and buy some fancy clothes and trips to Europe and so on. But if you've got all of that concentrated in Mr. Mittal, he's going to be doing a lot of good, I can assure you, like Bill Gates and so on. So I think what you're seeing is actually this enormous wealth combined with education, returning us to the old sort of attitudes which are altruistic, basically. And I think that's what you're seeing in a big way. And I think this is something which I think is another sort of effect. You can't quantify it, but it is something you see all down the road. So I think it's returning us to a kind of inequality which is actually productive rather than unproductive. So all this nonsense we get in the Indian discussions, and has inequality gone up by 2% or 5%, so on. It's all rubbish. I mean, you can write PhD dissertations on it or tie up politicians in the discussion. What matters is the kind of inequality. What is our social consequence? And I think it's a good thing. And I think it's particularly because it's going to educated people and in extreme forms, which they are actually the Premjis and the Narayan Murthis and so on, is really what I'm talking about. And you see a lot of that now breaking out in the modern scale migration and all directed towards their home countries, because we're all hyphenated Americans if we are in America. And we retain dual loyalties and so on. This is today's world. So it is not, it's something which really is something, we didn't think of it in those days. Now it is a reality altogether. And I think in the end, I think just one remark and I'll finish, or two remarks. One, of course, is that the very fact that IT has broken through, the old mindset that India can't export, India can't do things well, that is a general spillover effect in terms of the confidence you see in the country. And so even the old industries are now beginning to be less fearful of being in international competition. So I think the fact that this industry grew up without any governmental support, encouragement, protection, whatever, that I think has given, the old industry a great deal of confidence. So you see the opposition to removing protection much less, in my judgment, than ever before. And two, the fact that you're sending out first, quality stuff abroad itself helps other exporters to gain markets also. This is a matter of the quality you project. Today the image of India, as everybody has been emphasizing, and the perception is the reality also, it's a very different country. I was at an award ceremony for immigrants to America, Indian immigrants. And so Kanwal Rekhi was with me, and he gave a speech saying, we used to be thought of as a nation of snake charmers, and now no longer so. So I said, you should have asked me to write your speech, and maybe given me a nice honorarium for it too. But I said, I would have said, we were a nation of snake charmers, and now we become a nation of just charmers, right? And we smell like roses now, everywhere. Everybody wants Indians associated. It is a mark of an acceptance house approval. And I think that's really very important. And finally, I think we really have to think of professional community skills as basically sort of to and fro people, yo-yo migrants. It is not really people having gone away. People are coming back and forth. And you see a whole lot of synergy, interaction, which you see between Silicon Valley and Hyderabad. I'm just using IT examples. So the very notion that somehow your people have gone away, that there is somehow a once and for all decision where, bang, you're gone, either it's good or bad, that's no longer the way to think about it. So people are thinking of a brain circulation or a flow. You go away for a while, you come back, you bring ideas this way, then from here they go the other way. Wipro and Infosys are already hiring people abroad, and lots of our firms are beginning to be really big players. So everything is fluid, dynamic. A static conception like brain drain is no longer, even if there were downsides, which I don't see any downsides at all actually for a country like India. The template for Africa is very different. They're very small populations, very little manpower, bad educational systems, and huge needs. And it's going to require a very different kind of heavy lifting. But for us, it's a cinch. I mean, this is something we should be doing, celebrating, and I think we're absolutely right.
Well said. It's in 1893, a young barrister left India to make a life for himself and his family. Appalled by the practice of discrimination of man against man, he launched a movement against the ruling elite. Having helped the local population understand their rights and having empowered their minds, he left on December 19, 1914. A month later, he reached India and plunged into the struggle for freedom of the people of India. His name, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. You could say he was among the earliest NRIs. Not everybody, rather nobody can aspire to even begin to match what the Mahatma achieved in his lifetime. As Albert Einstein said, quote, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth, unquote. The burden of being away from one's motherland is both physical and emotional. I left India in 1976, nearly some 30 years ago, but despite having spent more than half of my life living overseas, I still have strong ties to my homeland. Being a non-resident Indian does not mean that our loyalty to India is divided or diluted in any way. I have always liked the term NRI as it recognizes that you don't have to live in India. India continues to attract me and strike a chord in me not only because of the fact that it is my country of birth and where I grew up and received my education and early business training, but because of the deep emotional ties which still bind me to the roots of existence. I am proud to be an Indian. The India I visit today is very different from the one I left in '76. Decades of economic reform have enabled the country to make substantial progress towards realizing its potential, and this is pleasing to see. In '83, total GDP stood at $212 billion. In 2003, this had risen to $603 billion and continuously growing. These are impressive figures, and the government has made clear its commitment to ensuring that GDP growth is between 8 to 9% over the next 20 years. According to the Indian Planning Commission's Vision 2020 report, this would result in a quadrupling of real per capita income, almost eliminating the percentage of Indians living below the poverty line. These are impressive goals, but they require action and implementation in a consistent and determined manner. We must also not simply look at such statistics in the context of India alone. I have always believed that India has the potential to become one of the world's major economic forces, and therefore we must continue to monitor our own progress against both other fast-growing economies and the major economies of which we aspire. China is the obvious example and dominates the news on a regular basis. But think also of the economies of Central and Eastern Europe. These countries have been posting strong growth over the past few years, driven by a desire to European Union and benefit from being part of the world's single largest market. They have pushed forward with economic reform and are making impressive progress. This region has been a core part of Mittal Steel's growth over the past 3 years. It was not only the growth prospect that attracted us. These countries recognize the benefits of foreign investment and have attractive conditions for business to operate. With this in mind, let me turn to the topic of today's speech, diaspora, brain drain, or net gain. If we look at dictionary, the word diaspora also means dispersion of the Jews among the Gentiles, mainly in 6th and 8th century BC. And this is very loosely used in India for the Indians living abroad. There is no denying the fact that over 25 million Indians live outside India today, many of whom are highly skilled professionals. All around the world, you will find Indians excelling across a whole range of industries. The achievements of many of them, particularly in the United States, are very impressive. The Silicon Valley is full of entrepreneurs who have demonstrated their spirit of adventure, their perseverance, and the ability to create wealth. It has been reported that about 1/3 of NASA employees are of Indian origin. I have also heard it mentioned that close to 75% of the senior research personnel in biotechnology and biochemistry in the United States are of Indian descent. The picture in the UK is not very different. The success does not go unrecognized. The United Nations Development Programme's recent Human Development report clearly acknowledged that the success of Indian diaspora is influencing how the world views India. Indian nationality for a software programmer sends a signal of quality, just as a made in Japan label signals first-class consumer electronics. The critics argue that if India is to recognize its true potential as an economic power, It needs its most talented people at home, not helping to boost the economy of the US or other already established economies. But it should be remembered that the success of Indians abroad is building respect for India on a global scale. Migration of people across the boundaries is hardly a new phenomenon. The success of United States as a society owes its origin to a liberal immigration policy under which the society welcomed with open arms people with diverse talents who ultimately succeeded in transforming the society to a super economic power. Looking back into our own history, we have evidence that India was able to achieve the pinnacle of its civilization around the beginning of the Christian era, and this is not only due to the high level of intellectual capability and pursuit of inquiry of its own citizens, but also due to its attitude of openness of welcoming into its fold people across the boundaries. India was seen as a land which was willing to offer shelter and asylum to those who faced persecution across distant frontiers, and the people who sought shelter contributed in no small measure to wealth creation, which made India, along with China, one of the two economic superpowers dominating the civilized world at the time. The political uncertainty that enveloped the society around the beginning of the first millennium in the Christian era saw a reverse migration of talented Indians to Middle East, carrying with them rich knowledge and wisdom to a newly emerging civilization. Having left India myself in the 70s, I am fully aware of the attractions that draw people to expand their horizons and set out in search of new challenges and opportunities. I set off in 1976 for Indonesia to set up a 500,000 ton of steel mill. Over the past 3 decades, I've been fortunate enough to expand the business to a capacity of 70 million tons with operations in 14 countries. All of these countries have different cultures, different laws, and different business environments. But a common theme runs through all of them, a desire to progress. We have observed and experienced firsthand these countries' economic reforms, and there are lessons to learn from each and every one of them. The most challenging privatization that we experienced was in Kazakhstan. It's a country that is rich in natural resources, but it realized that for its economy to depend purely on oil revenues could be very dangerous. Therefore, it moved ahead with its privatization program, which has successfully attracted much needed foreign investment. When we acquired our operations there, it was facing collapse. Steel production was inefficient and the workers had not been paid for several months. We had to invest heavily into the operation to move the business back to sure ground. Against the odds, we were successful and we managed to turn it around into a thriving, profitable business with a viable future. Having successfully participated in 15 privatizations now, there can be little doubt of the positive effects such deals can have for a country's economy. In almost all cases, the performance of each company we have acquired has improved substantially, often within the first 2 years of acquisition. Foreign investment, either through privatization or direct investment, boosts economic growth. Our most recent experience of this is in Central and Eastern Europe, which I have already mentioned, is demonstrating strong growth. The speed at which they have transformed themselves is impressive and serves as a reminder as to what can be achieved if you embrace the opportunity and open your mind to new thinking. This is, of course, only a snapshot of my experiences, but operating as a multinational does enable you to emphasize a best practice business environment based on our experiences worldwide. Instead of focusing on the loss of diaspora, India should focus on how this so-called brain drain can be turned into a net gain. How can all the experience and the knowledge that the diaspora has built up be used to India's advantage? I often hear the question, what have NRIs done for India? I would suggest a slight amendment. The question should be, let us see what we can ask NRIs to do in India. I've spent quite a lot of time in China recently looking at investment opportunities in the steel industry. They said to us, Mr. Mittal, it is not your money that we need. We need your experience, your expertise, and your technology. I have yet really to see this mindset in India. The diaspora has already played a significant role in shaping the image of India worldwide. Now we should be looking at ways in which we can channel our own experience back to help India fast-track its own progress. This is not to say that India's development can or should depend on the diaspora. Rather, it needs the fullest participation by all elements of society. We can only really develop when the opportunities are thrown open to everyone, that is the domestic Indian, non-resident Indian, and indeed those from other countries. I mentioned earlier that India is making progress, but without wanting to be controversial, I do not believe that this progress is either fast enough or broad enough. India in many ways is still held back by a fear of unknown and an inertia to change. This is not to undermine the progress that has been made. Yet the country has still not been able to make a visible dent in the overall poverty level, which continues to be one of the severest compared to any part in the world. Close to 30% of the population continues to be illiterate, and this position is unlikely to improve when over 30 million children do not receive education due to either a lack of access to school or extreme poverty. How can we accelerate our progress? The priority should be to create an appropriate economic environment. I believe there are a number of key elements that must be addressed to create the appropriate economic environment that is required. The first of these relates to rural India. The Indian economy remains highly dependent on agriculture, representing some 22% of our total GDP and employing nearly 65% of the country's labor force. Any economy where 2/3 of the population depends on 1/4 of the income has to change. Agriculture productivity continues to be low and dependency on monsoon is high. It is clear that much talked about land reform must be put into action. Additionally, structural reform needs to occur in order to speed up growth in other sectors and further diversify the economy. This could be accelerated by addressing the issue of privatization. This is still not receiving the government attention it deserves. There are countless examples all over the world that demonstrate that the state is not the ideal instrument for the running of businesses. This is true in both developed and developing economies. Having witnessed firsthand the economic benefits privatization brings, I am unable to understand the ambivalent attitude displayed by the Indian government with regards to its privatization policy. Privatizations carried out in a fair and transparent manner would improve the overall productivity of the individual industries, as well as releasing a substantial amount of funds to be gainfully employed in other priority areas. However, there are a number of other crucial areas that need to be addressed, which would make India more attractive for foreign companies. The first of these is infrastructure. India needs to improve its infrastructure through better roads, ports, airports, and power and water. This issue is also highlighted by the Indian Planning Commission's 2020 vision reports. Secondly, the government should reassess its labor laws. These date from the early 1990s and I believe are a deterrent to a foreign investment. Very few corporations would be willing to accept such rigid regulations. There is a definite need for more flexibility. Another issue that concerns me is labor productivity. India cannot continue to rely on competitive advantage arising out of inexpensive labor, and at some stage it will be difficult for us to keep our competitive edge in the absence of a significant improvement in productivity. Finally, the issue of corporate taxation needs addressing. India's corporate tax rate is still sitting at 30%. This is simply not attractive to foreign investors when compared with the tax rates offered by other developing countries. Poland and Romania, for example, have only 16% to 19% corporate tax. India must appreciate that such concessions are essential in helping a country grow. Let me sum up what I have been trying to say. We must accept that we live in a global society and that migration is a natural part of globalization. Opportunities are everywhere, and we should reach out for them whenever we can. Rather than wasting time pondering on what the results of this brain drain is, we must focus on ways in which it can be turned into a net gain. The diaspora has already enhanced the reputation of India around the globe. They have created a positive reputation of our countrymen as hard-working and highly skilled. They have established themselves at the very top of some of the world's most admired companies. They have a wealth of experience and knowledge that can be channeled back into this country. India should be proud of what they have achieved, and I do believe we have a role to play in helping India achieve its economic potential, but we alone cannot be held responsible for its success or lack of it. Let us all work together to create an economic environment and infrastructure which would facilitate flow of investment both domestically and internationally. This would help India claim its place as one of the world's most important economies. Thank you.
This is a question to Ellen Mittal. You spoke at length about privatization. You spoke about India not being clear about privatization, not going perhaps as far as you would like it to go. So let's, instead of talking generally, let's talk specifically. Let's take the Steel Authority of India. Do you think it should be privatized? Would you bid for it? And could you run it better?
If I say I'm not interested, it would be wrong.
Yeah.
And if I say, yes, I would be interested, it would be controversial because there would be a lot of comments on this. Now, basically my point here is not only fixated to steel industry, but generally I believe that most of the industries which are run by the state enterprises should be privatized. We need, as a country, we need a lot of funds. We are trying to get funds from our reserves because we need funds for growth. And I think privatizations, today is the right time to do the privatization when everyone is very positive about India. They are looking at India with a lot of hopes and optimism. They want to participate in the India's growth. So there is a lot of attractions to participate in India, and this is the right time. We should encash this opportunity.
You ducked the second part of the question. Could you run SAIL much better than it's run now?
I would put it like this, that our track record shows that whatever company we have acquired has done very well.